Part of my goal in narrating in this way is to calm the fears of my friends in this curious enemy they call biological determinism, and to make us think more richly about the mixing of agencies and the mixing of ontologies and the distributed kinds of mental and physical life that go on in constituting a livable life, which is always a multi-species and co-constitutive life. Okay? Now, this way of telling the history of domestication redoes the history of technology. It sets up a different narrative pattern for thinking about the history of technology and thinking about the relationships of matter and mind. Okay. That clearly is a kind of motivation on my part for telling the story that way. I also think it happens to be somewhat truer. Now, there's another part of this story that actually turns to the developmental biology of the organisms in question. And here I turn to a relatively recent convergence in biological thinking called ecological developmental biology. It's a synthetic interdisciplinarity that is made possible in biology these days by the techniques of molecular biology that allows answers to questions that were technically unmanageable before the very recent past. It allows folks to design experimental systems for asking kinds of questions like, can normal mental and physiological structure develop in an organism absent interaction with other organisms at key developmental times? The answer turns out to be, surprise, no. An interesting example of that, to make it concrete, would be to consider the really gorgeous light-emitting organs at the tips of the tentacles of a kind of squid that lives off the coast of Hawaii. These light organs on the tips of the squid can't develop without colonization by a very particular kind of bacterium at a very particular time in the development of the squid. So it's a two-species performance that allows the functioning adult organ to develop. Turns out that the structure of our gut has that same quality, that absent colonization by the proper bacteria at the proper time, the lining of our gut can't develop either correct structure or function. Now these are, in a sense, isolated biological stories, but for me they are paradigmatic of the processes of co-constitution, which I regard as normal and ordinary parts of being in the world. We've learned about co-constitution and performativity and other such matters in the human sciences. I think what I'm suggesting to you is that these patterns of thinking the world are happening across domains of intellectual work these days in quite generative ways, and that they allow us a narrative space for thinking about cohabiting this planet with ontologically heterogeneous others in ways that I regard as somewhat less lethal than some of the narrative patterns that we might have already known all too well.